What's up, people? It's Mental Health Monday. But more importantly, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So let's get this party started. However, before we do, please take time to read the following disclaimer. Okay, last week we covered abuse, but this week we're going to cover childhood trauma as well as adult trauma and their experiences. Let's move on. Let's start with what is trauma. Trauma is generally defined as any experience that is felt to be unbearable, that shatters the human psychic potential and affects the human capacity to relate and feel kinship with others authentically. Psychological trauma is the unique individual experience of a single event or enduring conditions in which A, the individual's ability to integrate their affective experience is overwhelmed, and B, the individual subjectively experiences a threat to life, psychosomatic integrity, or mental insanity. Felt being unbearable. The first part of this statement is specific to each individual, as none of us respond to anything in the same manner. In other words, our potential to trust, I said trust, others is limited, and in a number of cases, it may cause us to unjustly perceive others due to the triggers that have been embedded in our psyche. Comorbid, in other words, is a serious illness which may cause a mental or psychological response. The individual may be left feeling emotionally, cognitively, and physically overwhelmed, while common comorbid diagnoses associated with traumatic experiences include post-traumatic stress disorder, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, substance misuse, eating disorders, and personality disorders. What is trauma? Trauma is one of the primary reasons many may have relational issues. The problem is we listen, but we don't always understand how someone else telling you their experiences or stories is actually their way of sharing with you what has traumatized them. So if you care about someone and they entrust you with a traumatizing event that's occurred in their life, that means they trust you, and the expected response is for you to not inflict that same experience upon them, whereby it may cause harm within the existence of that relationship. In other words, be considerate of others' experiences and feelings. When we experience trauma, our relationship with existence itself is shattered. Greening. Trauma, it is the subjective experience of the objective. Events that constitute the trauma, the more you believe you are endangered, the more traumatized you will be. We're going to pause right here because the connection between the mental and physical is far more great than we realize. In reading the list below, some of these things I pray to never experience. However, there are those that have experienced many of these things way before they've even reached adulthood. It is therefore understandable why teachers struggle, students fail, and our neighborhoods are in turmoil. Psychologically, the bottom line of trauma is an overwhelming emotion and a feeling of utter helplessness. There may or may not be bodily injury, but psychologically, trauma is coupled with physiological, meaning the body goes through an upheaval that plays a leading role in the long range effects. In other words, your mental can affect your physical. Some research estimates that between 60 and 75% of people in North America experience a traumatic event at some point in their lives. What is a trauma response? A range of emotions both immediately after the event and in the long term. Here are some examples of trauma responses, both from the emotional and psychological perspective as well as the physical perspective. On the emotional side, there's anger, fear, sadness, shame, confusion, anxiety, guilt, hopelessness, irritability. On the physical side, there could be signs of headaches, digestive issues, ooh, my stomach hurt, fatigue, or racing heart, which is probably the most common, sweating, and feeling just nervous and jumpy. Here's a story I'm going to tell you about a friend of mine being caught in a flood some years back. He had just purchased a car approximately 3 months prior. He and the car got stuck in the flood in a gas station. But after he got out and started the car caught fire. Thank God there was a nearby neighbor that was watching and noticed that the car was on fire. Otherwise, he could have been consumed along with the car. About 30 minutes after being rescued, he locked himself in the bathroom and started to cry. Me being me, I said, "Man, you better get yourself together. You can always purchase another car." He was shocked that I was so blatant with my response. He soon stopped crying. However, what I did not know at the time, crying is actually a healing response by releasing the stress of the trauma. So sorry for my ignorance. Somatic experiencing focuses on bodily sensations rather than thoughts and memories about the traumatic event. By concentrating on what's happening in the body, you can release pent up trauma related energy through shaking, crying, and other forms of physical release. The source for that was the Help Guide. Trauma. What about the children? Oh my God. Research indicates that children are especially vulnerable to trauma because their brains are still developing. Children experience a heightened sense of stress during terrible events, and their bodies release hormones related to stress and fear. This type of developmental trauma can disrupt normal brain development. As a result, trauma, especially ongoing trauma, can significantly affect a child's long term emotional development, mental health, physical health, and behavior. The sense of fear and helplessness may persist into adulthood. It leaves the person at a significantly higher risk of the effects of future trauma. When it comes to relational issues, it is therefore important to know the person's childhood experiences, as it could potentially turn into a very disappointing, disheartening, and dangerous experience. Know who you're with. Yes, what about the children? 70.4% of youth in the juvenile justice system have a diagnosed mental illness. 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 through 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins at the age of 14 and 75% by age 24. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among those aged 10 to 34. As it relates to the Illinois justice system, during the months of January and February of 2021, 418 Black or African American youth were arrested. However, the most interesting is 554 non-Hispanic were also arrested compared to 188 white and 99 Hispanic. As a sidebar, when looking at these numbers, one must consider the boxes we are placed in. Now, according to the U.S. Census, non-Hispanic whites are referred to as Anglo-Americans, which includes European Americans, Middle Eastern American, and North African Americans. However, whites only are those having origins in the original people of Europe, Middle East, or North America, including those from Germany, Italy, Lebanese, Arab, Moroccan, or just Caucasian. Therefore, if you added the non-Hispanics with the white youth, there are far more of them than us being incarcerated, to the tune of 742 compared to blacks 418. The average age being 15.5 or 15 years, point 0.5, 15 and a half. The most prevalent cause being a warrant, followed by unlawful use of a weapon. What about the children? The saddest part? Overall, mental illness is prevalent among 17.3% of African Americans. According to the 2019 stats by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, only 32.9% received treatment. That is the second lowest, with Asians being the lowest at 23.3%. Let's pause, Black folk. Let's stop the myth, the stigma, and the self-abuse. Get help, please. And what's even sadder, 55% of U.S. counties do not have a single practicing psychiatrist. People with depression have a 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. 18.4% of U.S. adults with mental illness also experienced a substance use disorder in 2019. 9.5 million individuals. The rate of unemployment is higher among U.S. adults who have mental illness at 5.8% compared to those who do not at 3.6%. 37% of adults incarcerated in the state and federal prison system have a diagnosed mental illness. 41% of Veterans Health Administration patients have a diagnosed mental illness or substance use disorder. Let's get help, people. When I consider the years of internal trauma and turmoil that DMX endured, I couldn't help but talk about the effects of mental illness because there are many others that are not in the limelight that are suffering. When looking at statistics among African Americans, my heart weeps for those that suffer and those that endure. It is my hope and prayer that we as a people stop being ashamed, stop relying on oil slinging, altar calls, prayer that cause us to remain in a cycle of distress. Yes, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask or think. Yet, He has also provided a way of escape and requires us to utilize the talents of those that can help. Faith without works or corresponding action is dead. If you know of someone that needs help, perhaps you can lead them in the right direction to facilitate their healing. Let's not sit around and continue to talk about how jacked up they are. Do something, say something, but please don't remain idle and then go through the if I woulda, coulda, shoulda after something has happened. Wouldn't you want someone to help you, or would you rather remain in your despair? I holla.